We're recording.
All right. This open meeting of the Triton Regional School Committee is being conducted remotely, consistent with Governor Baker's executive order of March 12, 2020, and the current state of emergency in the Commonwealth due to the outbreak of the COVID-19 virus. In order to mitigate the transmission of the virus, we have been advised and directed by the Commonwealth to suspend public gatherings, and as such, the governor's order suspends the requirement of the open meeting law to have all meetings in a publicly accessible physical location. Further, all members of public bodies are allowed and encouraged to participate remotely. I hereby call to order the February 3rd, 2021 meeting of the Triton Regional School Committee at 7 p.m. I'm Narissa Wallen, Chair of the Triton Regional School Committee, and I would like to confirm that all members and persons anticipated on the agenda are present and can hear me. Members, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Erin?
I'm here and I can hear you.
Thank you. Paul Goldner?
I'm here and I can hear you.
Thank you. Maureen?
I'm here and I can hear you.
Thank you. Caitlin?
I'm here and I can hear you.
Thank you. Paulise?
I'm here and I can hear you.
Thank you. Linda?
I'm here and I can hear you.
Thank you. Paul Mayette?
I'm here and I can hear you.
Thank you. And Tina's sending her apologies tonight. She had a last minute work conflict, unfortunately, crop up. I think I saw Kaylee on the list. Yes, I did. I know she's here. Pretty sure she can hear us. She's probably doing other things. All right. Staff, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Triton Superintendent Brian Forget.
Here and I can hear you.
Thank you. Assistant Superintendent Kim Croto.
Here and I can hear you.
Thank you. School Business Official Kyle Warren.
I'm here and I can hear you.
And Special Education Director Dave McGee.
Here and I can hear you.
All right, thank you. For this meeting, the Triton School Committee is convening remotely via Zoom using the information posted on the district's website identifying how the public may join. If you are personally attending by video conference using your device's camera, please be aware that others may be able to see you. Committee members and administrators, please remember to mute your phone or computer when you are not speaking. All supporting materials that have been provided to members of this body are available on the district's website with the agenda posting unless otherwise noted. The public is encouraged to follow along using the posted agenda. Each vote taken in this meeting will be conducted by a roll call vote. Please note that this meeting is being recorded and that anything that you broadcast may be captured by the recording, or I should say will be captured by the recording. We now know to be true. All right. So welcome to the February 3rd meeting of the Triton Regional School Committee. We are solidly in budget season now after a couple meetings last week. So we'll be having weekly meetings for the foreseeable future, other than February vacation, which we'll skip. So we have two things on the agenda tonight. This meeting is traditionally just a budget meeting, but we do have pooled surveillance testing, which is a new offering from the state on the agenda as well. It's a kind of time sensitive discussion. So rather than wait until next week when we would be having a business meeting plus a tentative budget vote and try to add that in there, we opted to take this night, which will probably be a little bit shorter night, and pull that in tonight. It is likely, probable, I don't know at this point, that may end up on next week's agenda as well for a follow-up discussion, because there may be questions coming out of tonight, given that this is a brand new question or a brand new program that we may need follow-up on. So all that said, we are going to go straight into the meeting. And the next item on the agenda is oral communications from the public. The next item on the agenda is public comment. Members of the public, the meeting host muted you as you entered the meeting. If you would like to address the committee, please indicate now that you would like to do so, either by raising your hand on your video call or using the raise hand option on the participant screen. The meeting host will unmute you so that you can address the committee. Please refer to the public comment policy language on the agenda when making your comments, and remember to speak clearly and in a way that helps generate accurate minutes. When you have finished speaking, the meeting host will mute you again. And I'll read aloud the public comment, what's printed on the agenda in case you don't have this in front of you. It says, members of the public may address the committee for up to 3 minutes, longer with the permission of the chairperson. The committee will not engage in a discussion on topics raised during public comment, but may choose to add the topic to a future agenda. This agenda segment will be limited to 15 minutes unless it's extended, at the discretion of the chairperson. All right, so all that said, I'm going to open public comments. So if you would like to speak, you can raise a hand on a video call or use the raise hand option on your screen. And oh, I see a Jason Lowry. Hang on 2 seconds, Jason, and I will unmute you. That's not giving me the option. Hang on. Let me find you in the list. There we go.
Thank you.
Perfect.
Good evening. So yeah, my name's Jason Lowry. I have 2 kids, middle school and at the elementary at NES, and there'll be another one coming in next year, the year after. And I just wanted to voice my opinion regarding. I'm a big advocate for getting not only for hybrid, but not going back, even if we get a few more cases here and there, like not going back to full remote. And I'm a big proponent for, with the vaccine being rolled out, I've already gotten the vaccine. I'm a full-time first responder. With the vaccine coming out, I just hope there is a plan in place to get going with back to full-time. I know that's not on the agenda tonight, but I really just, as a parent, I want to voice my opinion about that. Also, the CDC's recommendation as far as 6 feet was explained to me that's why we've had some issues as far as going back to remote. And I feel that that's a standard. I don't think so. A standard's not a law. I think it's a standard by definition more of a guideline. So, and even if we miss those guidelines by, what are we missing it by with the square footage of the building? Like 6 inches, in my opinion, I say, okay, well, that we know that, but I've yet to see any kid as a first responder. I don't see kids really getting sick from this. So I just wanted to voice my opinion on where I stand, where I know for a fact a lot of parents stand. I can say this with no exaggeration. I've yet to run into one parent who has said, yeah, the kid should be out of school because it's very dangerous. And that's no exaggeration. That being said, I appreciate your time. I know you put a lot of time into this. Thank you.
Not sure if did you get cut off, Jason, or at the end of what you were saying?
Oh, no, I just, at the very end, I said, I appreciate,
Okay.
I'm sure I'm done.
Perfect. Okay, thanks. It just sounded like it cut off the last end of what you were saying there. So I wanted to make sure
no.
you were done before we.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else who wants to speak during public comment? I'm just sorry, got to scroll through all the screens here. See if I see anybody else on the list. Wendy, hang on, Wendy. Should ask you to unmute, Wendy.
Hi. So I just want to kind of second what Brian just said. I have a daughter in the 6th grade at SES. I think all in all, things have been going well. I'm hoping the committee will start having discussions about getting these kids back full time. I could be wrong, but I think DESE is allowing 3 feet social distancing. Not to say we have to go to 3 feet. I think if we just lowered it a little bit, there's still plenty of room to get these kids back. Schools are not dangerous. Kids are not deemed to be the super spreaders. And, I think we have to stop going backwards out of fear. The fear mongering needs to stop. The science says kids belong in school, and school is not super spreaders. I'm just hoping the committee will at least start discussing a plan so we're not blindsided in September and go back in September hybrid. I just think it's getting a little ridiculous, and we got to follow the science, and the science is there. That's all. I appreciate everybody's time. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Anyone else? I'm just scrolling the screens here. Victoria. Hang on a second. I'll ask you to unmute. Should be good to go.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Hi, my name is Victoria. I'm also a parent of, I have a 7th grader in the middle school and I have a 4th grader at Salisbury Elementary. I actually just basically want a third, what everybody has said so far. I'm also in favor of continuing hybrid and hopefully transitioning to full in-person and not going backwards. I am a nurse, so I'm also seeing the COVID from both sides, as I've mentioned before. But I wanted to share something kind of personal, just so, you know, people can kind of understand a little bit about what's going on. But I've been working remote this whole time, and I've had these kids home with me, as well as 2 younger ones who will be coming through the system. And unfortunately, my job is not as accommodating, and I actually had to leave my job because I had to help my kids who were home with their IEPs and learning remotely, which was extremely difficult. And my job really had no tolerance for me to be teaching my kids at home while trying to get my work done. So unfortunately, I had to leave my job, which was obviously not anticipated, and try to continue to school these kids, which is literally unrealistic, unfortunately, at this point. So now we're stuck in this position. But now with the kids back hybrid, obviously things are better, but I'm hoping that we also can come up with a plan here to move the kids back and transition to full in-person as soon as possible, or, you know, at least at a minimum by September. So I'm hoping, kind of what other people have said too, is that there is some kind of plan to move forward, whether it's following that 3 feet guidance or figuring out a plan how to get more kids in school with a 6-foot guidance put place by DESE. Again, I'm happy to help with anything that anybody needs. I know this isn't difficult, and the more people that can help, obviously it's helpful. So I just wanted to share a little personal story, I guess, because I know every time we come on here, I kind of feel like we always talk about, you know, the piece about the kids and their mental health and their sanity and all those types of things. But there's other things obviously that go into it, you know, from a family standpoint, from a medical standpoint, from all different standpoints. So just wanted to share that. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Anyone else? Scrolling, looking for screens. All right, I don't see any, so we're going to continue on. So the next item on the agenda tonight is new business. I don't know if any of the committee members have new business that they want to raise. All right, seeing none, then we are moving on to COVID surveillance testing, which I believe the superintendent is going to take.
So I will kick this off. Thank you. So the hope tonight is to have a formative discussion. As Narissa mentioned, there is a program that Department of Ed has launched. I've spent lots of time on webinars with the Department of Ed, with other superintendents and schools that have moved forward with pooled testing. And so I think what we wanted to do tonight was have a discussion, get the will of the committee in regards to the intentions, interest levels, and whether that's something we continue to pursue, or if that's something that we believe is not of value. So I shared with you via email, I believe, that both Kristen Jolivet and Tina LaCourse, who public health nurse for Salisbury, as well as, and Kristen is the lead tracer hired by all 3 of our towns. We contracted with them separately to do a little due diligence to get more details about the surveillance testing program. And so I think there's some key questions that we have to answer in order to determine the best way forward. So by way of context, what I asked them to do was model out what they believe the impact would be from a cost perspective. So the Department of Ed is paying for not the support, but the materials and processing of these pooled batch tests through March 28th. Beyond March 28th, it becomes the responsibility of the district. So we are looking at, we took a look at what the cost would be beyond March 28th. This is certainly something, there were districts who were ready to go. They had already gone down the path of looking at pooled testing. So when DESE came out with this, they were ready to jump on board. There are some other districts that I've spoken with, I'm not going to mention names, that have jumped on board and are now feeling a little bit of whiplash because it's pretty intensive to launch this program. the majority of what I've heard from folks who have done it and are currently or have started doing a pooled testing program, I should say a surveillance pooled testing program. So surveillance is we're proactively testing individuals, everyone, just staff, just students, grade levels, whatever. So surveillance is proactively testing rather than testing someone for COVID when they are symptomatic. So the concept of surveillance testing means that we're implementing testing through DESE. They're requesting, and apparently there's some flexibility, but their requirement was all staff, all students are offered to participate in the program, in that we're doing everything we can to encourage full participation. The pooled piece is a cost-saving mechanism, and what that means is, on average, the contract assumes roughly 10 swabs per pool, and rather than running a test on every single swab, not cost-effective, they batch 10 swabs together and do one test on 10 swabs. They then know if one of the 10, two of the 10, if that pool tests positive, then we have to have what's called reflex testing, and then move on and have some follow-up testing. Department of Ed is suggesting we use the Binax Now, which is the rapid antigen test. Not as accurate on the front side, but if you're using that as a reflex option, it's free. It's available to us at no charge. It's rapid. It's 15 minutes. So there are a lot of people who don't like that from a scientific analysis standpoint. This is certainly not my expertise. It wouldn't be the most accurate test on its own, but used in conjunction with pooled. Dr. Diane, I'm forgetting her name, from HHS, went through this ad nauseum about how the reliability of that test increases significantly. So, in speaking with those who have started a pooled testing program, certainly the swabbing and getting results of the tests is the first part. But what I've heard from every individual who is in the process of implementing or has previously implemented is that the response on the other end is what is far more time and labor intensive. So when you have, we know we're going to have positive pools, obviously. So when you have those positive pools, you now have 10 individuals to come back and perform additional follow-up testing on, and then depending on the results, there's additional tracing to do. So in that light, Kristen and Tina did some math thinking through. We modeled this out based on the assumption that we would be testing all individuals. So all in-person students and staff, if you're in person for any portion of the time, you would be considered eligible for this testing. It cannot be, I mean, we could negotiate it, but as a general rule, we cannot require it of staff or students. So what we would be doing is strongly encouraging and obviously doing some work to advocate that families give consent for their students to participate in this testing. So if we looked at all students, all staff, Department of Ed is requiring this on a weekly basis for their portion of this. So it's roughly 2,375 individuals currently, 2,375, who are in person all or part of a week. That's students and staff. If we were to assume 100% participation, which we know that would not be the case, the way the cost broke down is we assumed there'd be roughly 128 man hours to, and I mean, we can get into more detail later on if we determine this is a path we want to go down, but rough figures, 128 man hours, that's 4 individuals, 32 hours to plan for, provision, package. We have to then get them to the lab, all the follow-up, the reflex testing, all of that, we figured about 128 hours a week. So we with that math, that's about, that is about 11,000, just shy of $12,000. I'm sorry, no. So for the staffing is just about $4,500 a week for staffing. And for the testing, we would pay $50 per pool, and the pool on average will be 10 individuals. So using a figure of $5 per individual, If we had 100% participation, that would be $11,875 a week. So the two combined is $16,300 per week, or a total of $65,000 per month, $65,420. That is likely the high water mark in that it assumes participation of every individual who would be eligible. But what we don't know is the man hours. What I can tell you is that in talking with our nurses, adding anything, they're working nights, they're working weekends, the contact tracing time that they're spending is very extensive. So they're not opposed to testing. It's a matter of who's going to be responsible for that because of the reality that nurses' jobs are full-time on a normal basis. And now you add in all of the COVID protocols and things that have to be in place for the regular day, let alone the follow-up beyond any normal positives that we get. So, so looking at a cost of about $65,000 a month beyond March. One of there are many details, and we would have to get into this if we believe, if we want to move forward. In speaking with DESE, they been asked, the question was asked, did you really mean what you said? Their take is, if there is a positive pool, we don't have to quarantine that whole pool right away. Their belief is that in a proactive surveillance mode, if you will, I don't know if that's the right term, that because there's a positive member of the pool, we should get them in as soon as possible, but that we don't have to automatically isolate those students. I can tell you we would, right? I think in speaking with our nurses, with Tara, with Kristen, with our town health agents, that we talked about that, if there's 1 in 10 people are positive, why would you not instantly quarantine that pool? So it adds a lot of questions about timing and being able to have access to do the follow-up testing, the reflex testing. So it's, if you were to say, and we've had this discussion, if CIC Ginkgo, and I'm blanking on the third partner, if the state were to say, we're going to provide this testing at no additional cost to the district, there is tremendous value, tremendous value. The question becomes, what is our hope? Is the goal? What's the purpose of the testing? Is it to allow us to bring more students in, and we're comfortable with that? Because if that's the case, it's certainly going to continue beyond March. Or is it a stopgap? There are districts who are looking at this as a stopgap until educators are quarantined. I've heard arguments for and against that medically. So I think that the question comes down to, as we're looking at a potential cost of $65,000 a month, I don't think it would be more than that, right? The staffing could require more timing. I don't think so. I think that's a pretty solid assumption on the timing it would take. And likely early on, there would be fewer than 100% of students and staff participating. My guess would be we would have a very, very high percentage of staff participating, and the percentage of students participating would increase over time. So the question I think for tonight is, do we believe there's a value to this, to spending this kind of money? We've talked about this, and we'll talk about the budget. We have 854,000 new ESSER II funds. We've kind of earmarked, was it close to 500,000 of that already? And we've talked about bringing that into next year as a buffer, because we know we can't stack a buffer into our budget. The towns can't support that. So I think it comes down to a question of, is the $65,000 as a ballpark figure, do we believe there's a value there? I think, Department of Ed has made it pretty clear that their goal in this surveillance testing is bringing everyone back full-time, sooner rather than later. Not talking about September. There've been comments made about after April break. So if that's the case, then that changes our overall goal, and that may then impact whether or not we believe the spend of $65,000 is a viable cost. So that's the hope tonight is to have a discussion. I had shared with Marissa, you know, to have kind of a formative discussion about this as a concept. I think, you know, we have to identify what is the goal. And then, you know, once we determine what the goal of the testing is it, we don't have to do, initially Department of Ed said to partner with them, you have to do all students, all staff every week. My understanding is they've been a little bit more flexible with that. Districts who have said we want to start with all staff, not students yet. There are some districts that are testing everyone, students and staff at the middle school and the high school, but not the elementary. So there's no real rules, right? We could determine what we wanted to do with the testing. But I think we have to first determine what the goal is so that we can design the testing program that we think answers or meets the need. And then we can determine whether or not we believe it's a cost-effective way to spend those dollars. Yeah, I'll stop there.
So I'll open it to questions in a second, but for those of you who are sort of just note takers like I am, the third company, in case you're going to go research afterwards, is Project Beacon. So.
And I should say too, but just before, I know I said I'd stop talking. So the contracted rates are the contracted rates. So the rates that the Department of Ed has confirmed with Project Beacon, Ginkgo, and CIC. The contract is through March 28th, but after the partnership, they expect that those prices will continue and it will be through a formal RFP. So we have access to those costs beyond when the Department of Ed is paying for them. So there are many districts who have looked at this and said, we just can't jump in this quickly. And the Department of Ed has said, understood, those costs are still there, contracted costs, so you can jump in when you want. Department of Ed is only covering through March 28th. And Department of Ed is covering the testing costs. So they're covering the cost of roughly the $5 per individual. So on a weekly basis, they're covering the 11,800. We would still be covering the 4,500, even currently. That would start as soon as we start the program. Now I'll stop talking, sorry.
All right, thank you. Paul Goldner.
So just sort of roughly, our costs, if we did this from now until the end of the year, would be about $200,000, 65,000 for April, 65,000 for May, part of that for June, and then personnel costs for end of February and March.
Yes. Yep. As a round figure, yes, that's the ballpark I would looked at was $200,000. Yep.
Did you have another question, Paul? You still got your hand up? No? Okay. Maureen?
Well, Brian, I apologize. My Wi-Fi was unstable and I went in and out a couple of times, so you may have said this, but is there any thinking that the coverage would be extended beyond March? That they would possibly extend that?
There has not been any indication, no. It sounds like the department has a significant or a set pot of money that they're allocating for this. I suppose if they don't get enough districts who are able to jump so quickly, because it is such a process to get the plan in place, maybe they extend that, but there hasn't been any indication that they will pay beyond March 28th.
Questions or discussion from the committee? Paul Mayette?
I'm wondering, and
Oh, we lost your audio, Paul. You come back to you? All right, I got Linda in the queue and I'll let you work on your audio issues. Linda?
With everything that I've read on this topic, I mean, the effectiveness of this testing, it's not known, there's not enough evidence and it's not enough known on this. that we could even have a lot of false positives as well, you know? So, I mean, I don't know how well vetted this test is. Do you know anything more about this test of?
Well, I mean, the test itself is a viable test. It's a full PCR test. So it's an anterior nasal swab, but it is a full PCR. So it's a 24, 48-hour response. This is the Binax would be used as the reflex testing when we know we have a positive pool, to identify the positive within the pool.
Oh, I see.
Yeah. So the Binax is not the test. This is a full, I mean, where we're paying $5 per test, you know, this is a full PCR. The reason why it's $5 per test, I mean, 50 to 80, depending on who you're contracting with, Broad Institute or whomever, 50 to 80 is kind of the rate for a PCR test. So same thing here, it's about 50 to 85, and that allows between 10 and I think the Beacon allows up to a larger number per pool, but we would look at pooling classes, right? So that a cohort, so if I'm a 4th grade teacher, Mr. Forget's cohort A, 10 kids, that's one pool. My cohort B, that's another pool. And so then you identify when the pool comes back, it's the follow-up testing that would be the Binax now. Or,
Okay.
you know, we've also talked about, I shared with you that Mike Ronca from Action Ambulance has offered to provide testing, full PCR testing at his cost on a limited basis. He is actually now allowing us to swab where any faculty or staff that are symptomatic, we're now using Action, and it's a full PCR test through the Broad Institute, and he's covering the costs, which is pretty phenomenal. They even come and get it from us. So it's, we have not every nurse is doing it, but we have a couple nurses where we're making sure the staff on the same day, if they're home, they can drive through, or if they're in the building, they can pop down so that we can do those tests. We looked at what it would cost to use a full PCR like that as the reflex testing, and it does get very, very cost prohibitive, about $60 per test, if we were going to start doing it en masse. So it's really the Binax is the best way to identify the positive. If you have a positive pool and then have all negatives on your Binax, Department of Ed has said basically, okay, then you send all kids home and let them deal with themselves. There's been some other follow-up that talked about we have a responsibility once we have the Binax does not give you a confirmed positive. It's a presumptive positive because it's an antigen test. So there's now some confusion about, okay, so if you're tested, you're positive in the PCR pool, and then you test positive on the Binax antigen, do you have to then go get a full PCR? And so talking through those details about what that means specifically, because technically, you know, according to the town tracers and health agents, you're a presumptive, not a positive, but they would treat everyone the same, but it's not a full PCR. So yeah, that's a good question, Linda.
Does it have to be done every week?
Does not. Oh, according to DESE, yes, right? So if we're going away from the DESE partnership where they're paying, my understanding is we can design our own program if we're just paying the contracted rates through Beacon, CIC, or Ginkgo.
So we have coverage until March.
They pay for the testing processing until March, the end of March through March.
Right. And if after that, if we didn't want to do it every single week,
yep,
we would be able to design our own program after that.
Yep. And we may, right? I mean, I think there's definitely been interest from districts jumping into this program, but I don't think it's been, I get the sense it's not as robust as they had hoped.
Right.
So it sounds like there's a little bit of flexibility from what they originally said. So maybe they would allow us to do that and design it our way now. You know, it's in speaking, I will say, you know, in speaking with Kristen and Tina, talking through the cost effectiveness. They have questions and concerns about the cost effectiveness. Again, it's not a bad thing to get more information about those who are positive. It's just at what cost, and is there a benefit to the amount of money we would spend? So upfront, even with DESE, however many weeks we could partner, we're saving that 11,000, call it 12,000 a week, but we're still spending the 4,500 a week. If we drop that in half, right, every other week, obviously those numbers drop in half. I mean, there's in neighboring districts, they've experienced, done baseline testing and found one case in the entire district, and spent a lot of money to find that one case. So part of this is, it's about the wisdom of the investment. It's not about, it's not valuing or devaluing the data that we would get from the tests. It's, do we have the funding, given everything else we're talking about, wanting to spend money on, this COVID one-time money on, is this the answer? And I keep going back to what will it change? If we're testing, is it going to give us more confidence to stay in hybrid? Or is it going to give us more confidence to start talking about a shift to more in person? Those are two very different avenues in regards to our approach.
So regardless of DESE paying, we would still have to pay money anyways.
Yeah, we would spend about, we'd spend about 18,000 a month right up front. And then it turns into 65. So if we did the month of March with DESE, it would cost us about 18,000. And that could be less too, right? I mean, this is based on some assumptions. 1 week, it could be less, right? These would be hourly individuals doing the work, and the testing would be pretty standard, the swabbing, but the follow-up, right? If there's one pool, much less follow-up. 10 positive pools, exponentially more.
Okay.
So I should say too, the assumption for DESE is that grades 2 and older are self-swabbing. Obviously, it's not, hey, everyone do the swab. It's very monitored, right? So there's in talking to the districts that have kind of gotten into a rhythm, that have been doing this for a while, tend to be bigger urban cities, different funding pots. They can, for a class of 10, 12 students, they can get it down to 5, 6, 7 minutes. Once you get into a rhythm and a routine early on, it's not that quick. But students who are able to self-swab, I think it's 10 seconds per nostril. And then, but the individual who's, if you're monitoring, right? If this was a group of seniors and I can monitor them from afar, I only have to have a surgical mask. If I am in any way interacting with the testing materials or the individual, which our discussion with Tara as our lead nurse, and then Kristen and Tina, it just makes sense to have one person who's doing that, right? So it's helping someone who needs help, and then handling the container that becomes the pool, the 10 to 15 test swabs. They have to be full PPE, full certified N95, mask, gown, the full rigmarole. So there's districts who love the traveling tester, right? Rolls into the classroom, kind of cycles through the students. There are those that have found better luck with having a station in a room. Class walks down, kind of comes through, heads back to class. High schools have tended to use the lunch block and having stations during lunch block. And then we would have to do 2 days at every school, right? So there's 2 cohorts. So we would have to have testing on 2 days per week. And then staff would pick 1 day, one cohort that they would be part of. And then cohort A would be 1 day and cohort B would be a separate day.
Well, I want to thank you for this extensive, the amount of money and time that this is going to entail is just incredible.
Mm-hmm.
That I think it's, what are we gaining by doing this? You're absolutely right. I don't have any more questions, Brian.
Thanks, Linda. Caitlin.
So I guess I'm a little with Linda, like what is the gain, right? So if it pushes us forward to be more in person or to stay in hybrid or to kind of open those discussions, but I guess the more immediate is, do we know, I know the middle school and high school students specifically have shared some concerns about feeling safe and being in the classroom. Do we have a sense of whether or not this would help raise our attendance on hybrid days? Do we have a sense that this would ease a little bit? Because if we can roll out our plan specific to our need set, would it be something we could talk about for just the high school students? If that was something that would get them in the building and feel secure about it?
I would say great question. So I think I don't have any data that says that testing would make students feel more secure based on the feedback that we'd received. I think it's more about, call it the environment, right? It's about what they're walking into. There's a lot of attention paid for students walking, distancing in the hallways. Just a very different thing at the high school level where students aren't walked around compared to you go to one of the elementary schools and students are walked around and their teachers are all about measuring the distance between them. So it's a very different beast. So that's certainly something that Patrick and the high school team has been working on with teachers, how to make students feel more comfortable. And is it about explaining or is it about things that we need to change? So that's one thing. I will say that in kind of the other questions I had, and I kind of stopped before I went on because I talk a lot, is I think that's a key question is before we even venture down the road is doing a very quick survey. Would you, I mean, it could be a 2-question survey and it doesn't need to be live for 3 weeks. I think we could very quickly do staff and student/family surveys. It'd be families and then students at the high school. I think we explained that students at the high school now get anything that comes out through the district. So a quick survey to see what the participation would be. Because I would say, personal opinion, if we have 60% participation, still 40% that we have no idea about, and that further decreases the value of our investment if there's still a huge population that isn't being tested. And that is not something we can require. So like I said, I fully anticipate that there would be large, heavy, high participation with faculty and staff. With families, I just don't know. I don't know. So I think a survey is the first step.
So that just leads me right back to where we started this whole conversation with, but thank you.
Glad I could help.
Erin, you're up next.
Brian, I know that we talked a few months ago about the Binax testing, or at least I thought it was the Binax testing. And we had tabled that because there were some other associated costs that went along with that we didn't see as being a positive at the time. Is that still the case that we would still, and if I recall correctly, I'm trying to just remember, we had to pay for certain test kits, but they covered the cost of running the test. And we also had to pay for the material, get the biohazard, sort of thing.
Yep. So we actually, as part of this, we are pursuing, I guess is the right term, the approval to use the Binax now. So if it were the if it were the reflex testing after the pooled, the only, as we dug deeper into that, the biohazard, the bio waste is the biggest concern in question. There is no cost for the testing. It is at this point a federally provided test, and it's a 15-minute. It's literally you swab, you kind of snap the swab in. It's kind of a plastic applicator, close it, put on the counter for 15. But that whole apparatus, that piece, if you will, stays with you, and we have to dispose. Unlike this testing, the pooled testing, materials come into swabs and tubes, and everything goes out. But we are pursuing using the Binax, and even if we don't pursue pooled testing using the Binax for symptomatic individuals. So if it's not being used as a reflex testing, it can only be used for symptomatic individuals. And then for, as I mentioned earlier, at no cost to us right now, unless it gets out of control, that Action Ambulance is providing full PCR tests through Broad Institute, usually 24 to 36 hour response time for any symptomatic faculty and staff.
So what's the cost for the disposal? You said that the test kit itself is no cost. So it's the employee time and the disposal.
Yep. So I don't have a cost. It's not extensive.
Thanks.
Thank you. Paul Goldner. Oh, Paul Goldner has disappeared off the list. I don't know if that was intentional. I'm assuming that was intentional that he took himself off the list. All right. Anyone else have questions? Paul Mayette. He's hopefully with audio.
Yeah, we're back in now.
There you go.
There he is.
All right, can you hear me now?
Gotcha.
Yep.
Just trying to think about potential cost savings and recognizing that there are any number of logistics on this question. Is there anything that would prevent us from seeking health professionals from the community as volunteers to cut down some of those man hours? Or does that get into contractual problems or other?
Possible, yes. We love volunteers, right? Volunteers are wonderful. Volunteers are volunteers. And when volunteers are great, volunteers are great. But if we're going to implement a testing program, we have to make sure it's going to happen. And so what we've heard from other neighboring districts, some near, some farther, have said they started with volunteers and it just didn't keep up, right? So one week it was great. They were able to do all the testing. The following week, someone got tied up, right? And when someone's volunteering the time, you can't get mad at them. So, you appreciate every minute they'll give to you. But so the question has been, or the advice has been, if you want the program to run successfully and consistently, pay people, right? So could we try volunteers? Yes, we could.
Thank you.
Thank you. Paul Goldner.
My hand is intentionally back now.
All right.
So the first question I have is, we have about 400 and something thousand uncommitted dollars from the ESSER 2 just money that we haven't thought about. I would assume this would fall under that category where we could spend that money on this testing if we decided we wanted to forge ahead with that.
So two pieces to that. Yes, we could. But we've thought a lot about that money. So I would say, we've got a document to talk about with the budget just to start laying out, right? That is brand new. We just learned about that last week. Kyle now has all the details on regards to what we can and can't spend it on. There are some big pots, or there are some big projects and big spends that we know we need to be spending this on, right? Summer extended learning mitigation into the school year, all the learning loss that we know we need to do anything and everything we can to think creatively and strategically to backfill all of that learning loss. That's a huge priority. Food services, we've kept that going, knowing it's running a loss, the curriculum implementation. My only fear is, yes, those funds are available. We're also, we keep coming back to every day, Kyle fends off, hey, Kyle, what do you think about this for spending the money? And it's usually coming from Kim and me. But, there are, yes, I'm given everything we're attempting to do through this spring with an eye towards a full return of students. There are still many unknowns. Even when we return to full in-person, vaccinated with masks, I mentioned this last week, do we still have a remote academy? That's going to be an added cost that we're not currently budgeting for. So granted, there'd be savings in other areas, but it's just, that is likely my understanding, is that is likely the last pot of funds to come directly to schools in that fashion as it's come directly to us, with that level of non-restriction, I should say, that allows us to make those decisions with those funds. So, so yes, that 410 that's showing on that other sheet is accurate. Those are available funds. But if we're going to talk about spending half of that on testing, that starts to make me very nervous. We spent less than that and did it every 3 weeks or half the population, right? Then it's a very different discussion. Yeah. That was a long answer to a fairly short question, sorry.
Thanks. Police.
My internet connection went unstable there, and I lost the last sentence or so. But I guess I would just say, to my mind, this is an avenue to getting full in person in May and June. So that to me is kind of that trade-off.
Mine says you're talking, but I can't hear you, Paul.
I don't see him either. Is his
I don't
camera
see
on?
him either. I was just gonna say that.
Okay.
I had a tree fall on the lines to my house yesterday in the storm, and our internet has been a problem since then. So I apologize. I was saying that to me, this is an avenue towards a potential return to more in-person learning in after April vacation. And so from that cost perspective, if that were possible, that would be worth it.
All right, thank you. Police.
Oh, you're muted. There you go.
Sorry about that.
That's good.
One of the concerns I have is what Brian just raised moments ago, and that is, as we contemplate spending money at this point, what does full in-person mean down the road? And I'm just concerned about students that, not concerned about going to school from a fear factor, but students who are medically challenged or have people in their family who are medically challenged and really can't afford to return to school. And my concern would be spending the money now to the detriment of keeping open the possibility of remote academy for those people that need it, not necessarily for those that want it, but those that truly need it. And my other concern would be that to the extent we do consider the testing now, I think it would be more appropriate to be utilized at the high school level, because as we have all said again and again, they are the cohort, if you will, that really don't have a choice for a good solid education like the people in the hybrid at the K through 8 grades.
Thank you. Other questions or comments? Paul Mayette?
I believe I asked this the very first time we discussed this, which seems like about 3 months ago, but couldn't have been. We can buy into this at any time still. Is that correct? That has not changed?
Say that one more time. I'm sorry.
We can choose to buy into this program at any time. So
Yes.
if we didn't decide now, we could decide in late March or.
Correct. Yep. And it's not.
I'm
Yeah, my understanding is as soon as we start, if it's before May 28th, we get the advantage of DESE paying for the testing. But beyond, they made it very clear that beyond March 28th, that the pricing that is out there will be a state contract that we have access to.
I'm just thinking ahead to this potential new COVID relief bill and what might be in that that would make this more feasible, or might even be looking to establish this type of program.
Yeah, well, and I guess my fear is the long-term piece, right? So if we put this in place and it is what gives us the confidence to return, and then we can't afford to keep it going, no, right? That's not good. We don't want to go backwards. So everything, all the messages coming through DESE and through the state who have been, the focus has been on, don't expect another large influx of direct aid to schools like ESSER and ESSER 2. You mentioned, Paul, I mean, that's a good point, that at the federal level, they're talking about expanding testing. So that might be different, right? So that might be something that it's not just unrestricted aid coming to schools like ESSER 2, but it might expand our access to testing, both the availability of however that looks, right? Testing we're doing, testing we're contracting, testing that's provided to us as a public school. So that is certainly not perfectly clear yet. But yes, that I've read that as well, that is certainly a portion of the next stimulus bill.
All right, Linda's up next.
Sorry.
Is there a chance that you can mainly test teachers? That would give teachers more confidence that.
Yep. So again, I according to DESE, they want everyone. If we said, okay, we're willing to pay for it right away, or they have signaled, and I haven't heard this from them, some districts have mentioned that they're being a little bit more flexible. I don't know why. Is that, like I mentioned, are they not getting the robust response they wanted? So there might be the possibility of just staff. That certainly is a very, very different exercise than testing students and staff. As far as, every staff member is an adult and can sign a consent form as they're being tested. Collecting 2,300 students consent forms is a very different process. So yes, so there would be a way. Technically, no. I would confidently say yes. If we said we want to move forward in just testing staff, I believe there would be a way to do that.
That might be an avenue to take.
Yep.
I know this is probably not helpful.
Oh, you muted yourself halfway through your sentence.
I don't know, I think I might have to fire my IT guy again.
It's called self-regulate.
I said, I'm sure this probably isn't helping you by not
No,
giving
so
you a.
It is. It's not concrete help, but it is helpful. I mean, I think ultimately I have to ask the question. So what's the next step? But I mean, this is helpful discussion.
Because I think that would be probably a more lucrative way to go, because at least it may get staff more comfortable being in the building. That's all I have.
Thanks, Linda. Pauline, you are up next.
Brian, did I understand correctly at the outset that our existing nurses and contact tracers wouldn't be able to assist because of what they're doing right now in any contact tracing related to this testing that we're considering?
So the hours that are assumed in that weekly, the 32 hours for each building, includes all of the testing. I think Tina and Kristen, the two, one of our public health nurses and the contact tracer, would be involved in testing. They work on a contract basis, so I think they'd be interested. There might be other individuals that we bring in. It likely couldn't be just two individuals. But this includes costs for the testing, the follow-up, the reflex testing for positive pools. So there's an assumption of hours there that's way beyond just the swabbing of all the students and staff. So there, any of the tracing would still be done. Kristen as the lead tracer for our 3 towns working with the schools, and then each of the school nurses would still be doing the tracing. It's just, it's more time intensive for them to pass that off to someone else because they know the families, they make the connections. So there are costs associated with that. We're paying if they're tracing overnight or on the weekend. We are paying our nurses an hourly rate or per diem rate to do that. It's only fair. But yeah, so that cost wouldn't change. because that's already an assumed cost. But they wouldn't, that all the other processing and follow-up is assumed in these numbers. Yeah.
Thank you.
Other questions or comments from the committee? All right. I have a couple of things. So I guess to go to one of your questions, Brian, was, you know, would this have prevented, you know, what would it prevent moving forward? And I mean, just thinking back, you know, we've had questions about staffing, and we've had questions about, you know, cases that where we were told we were going to experience a surge, which we did experience after the holidays, and that going remote for a number of weeks was the you know, a wise response to that. But going back into the fall, the things that we were struggling with back then were a lot of testing times and the testing turnaround times and the ability to get access to appointments. And while surveillance testing isn't that type of testing, I do wonder if those cases where we were sitting in a situation where we had someone who had been tested 12 days previous, and we were just getting their positive response, and we knew that that individual had been back in the building because they felt better, and we knew that their close contacts had been back in the building because they didn't know any different, because we hadn't been able to notify them because we didn't have that positive. Could those have been avoided? I think this goes to your question about surveying people and seeing how widespread the acceptance is to do some testing like this. Because if testing was widespread, I think maybe we could have avoided those. I think maybe those wouldn't have happened if we were able to, in this case, have, you know, a more guaranteed turnaround time, because it's outside of our, you know, our local Quest system, which doesn't seem to have been have been as good for our area, I guess I should say, as it was for some other areas. And, you know, there wouldn't have been the fight to get appointments. So could that have helped? I would guess that if we had widespread use in a program like this, it probably could have helped in some of those situations where we're experiencing those really long turnaround times that were delaying all those responses. I also wonder, you know, again, if it was widespread acceptance into a program like this, where a lot of people were participating, if we could have picked up some of those in-school transmissions earlier, you know, to this situation, to the extent where those individuals were either out of the building or out of the building at least a little bit faster, and had reduced some of that in-school transmission that we saw. So to my thinking, this all goes back to what number of the populations that we're dealing with would participate in this. And I agree with you that I think the survey is the next best thing to do at that point. And that I think a number of people have said this, that we should consider subgroups. I know that I think it was National Association of School Nurses had kind of a best practices document out on this when I was kind of doing a general web search. And they had said, you know, that if you have access to do surveillance testing, that one kind of the first group you should look at is staff. And then you should work your way down from kind of the oldest students to the youngest students in your programs as you're considering rolling something like this out. So I think I would hope that we can run a survey that, you know, we can look at those individual groups. So I'm hoping that we would be able to break down those survey responses to kind of look at staff versus older students versus younger students, however that's broken up. So that we have an idea of what that looks like. And I would like to see, you know, given the number of students that did express concerns about safety at the high school in particular, to see what their response might be to something like this, and if it would have an effect on their feeling of safety in the school buildings. And I do have one last question, just in light of recent local events, and, you know, knowing that we're kind of ending one sporting season and coming to the next. Is this something, I mean, I didn't see it in any of the DESE documentation that I was able to find online, but would it be possible to maybe look at testing athletes, even if we were testing the general population, just so we don't have a situation like there was locally with a number of, you know, individuals on a sports team? I know that this is something that Principal Kelly had expressed some concerns around with sports, is sports themselves just by running and potentially having transmission there with some of them being, you know, more high contact definitely than an average school day is, potentially having a negative impact on the, you know, the academic side of it, the school itself. So I guess that's my last question is can you kind of parse it down to that level, do you think?
So I'll take those in reverse order. Technically, again, Desi's response, no, you're doing it with everyone. I have heard schools that are trying to do that and making it a requirement to participate in sports. Generally, a requirement for students to participate in school is not something we can enforce under FAPE. However, they're testing the theory of that's an extracurricular, it's not required, so we can require an additional like physicals and all of that. So that absolutely is an avenue we could pursue. Again, per DESE, no, but I think that would be, if we were to get into the queue, we could make that happen. And then I agree. I think certainly a survey, a very brief survey that gives some links to some information about the surveillance testing program. Not linking right to the DESE site because that will overwhelm people, but just some basic understanding of what the tests are. And then, you know, would you participate, would you not participate, and being able to break it down by each of those categories, and then also by age and grade level. And then I think back to your, it's a point that I'll react to, not a question you asked that I'm answering, but I don't think you have to wonder. I think it definitely would have given us more data that would have allowed us to react differently back in September, October, November. So I don't think there's any question that any of this data is of value. The question is how valuable and what is it worth in regards to committing funds. So, so absolutely, that we would have had we caught, right, if we were testing on a weekly basis, we would catch the majority of it if we're testing on a weekly basis for sure.
Yeah, and I guess that's where part of my, I think if we were coming into this in early December, this would be a far different conversation, at least for this first 6-week period that DESE's been kind of talking about, than it is right now, where, you know, we're hopefully coming down and will continue to kind of come down both on community cases and school cases. And I do think it would have been a far different discussion back then. Back then, I'm pretty sure I would have said, you know, even if we're getting 80%, like, let's go for it, because that can save us some time in hybrid, catching the cases that were resulting in a whole lot of doubt on, you know, what was happening with in-school transmission and exposures and all that stuff. So. Questions or comments from the committee? I mean, I think Brian has talked about, you know, running a survey. Is that the direction? Is there anybody that's dismissing this out of hand and just doesn't want to go any farther down this road? Are there specific questions that need to be included on that survey that you don't think have been talked about so that you have the data that you'd like to see? Anybody? Maureen?
Well, I apologize for sort of being quiet because my Wi-Fi is unstable like Paul's. But the survey idea I think is great, and I think that's where we should be starting. I think it should be a really simple question of, would you participate? Because like you said, Brian, if we have only 60% participation, what's the point? It would seem like a lot of wasted money if we don't have a larger percentage of our student population that would participate. So I think that's the best place to start. And then we'll go from there.
Pauline, you're up next.
So Brian, what type of percentage of the survey voting in favor of testing would you expect and want in order to say to the committee, let's do this testing? I mean, what kind of number, Brian, do you think would be appropriate?
I mean, I would want to, I'm not a medical expert, right? Say this all the time. I mean, we would want a significant majority of people to be participating, 75, 80%, 85%. Like I said, I think we would easily hit that with staff. So I think the other end of the survey with staff will be us coming back and saying, yes, this is a value to pursue with our faculty and staff. For families, I literally have no idea. I certainly know how people feel about remote learning and about hybrid learning and about many other things. But I don't even know where to begin guessing where families would land on having the surveillance testing with their children. But I mean, if it came back 60%, 55%, 65%, I mean, again, you're talking about a third of the population still isn't testing. So again, if it were free, absolutely. But to be investing, right, 65, cut that in half, 30,000 a month, 20,000 a month. With all the unknowns that we have ahead still, I really want to save as much as possible of that money to address the problems. And right, the goal here is keep moving forward, not taking back steps. That'd be my take.
Other questions or, sorry, go ahead. I didn't know there was more.
Marissa, there's always more.
So, I should know that by now, Brian.
I know. So is it, let me see if I can kind of capture what I'm hearing. I'm not hearing anyone say we should be running as fast as we possibly can to partner with the Department of Education at all costs and get testing in place as soon as we possibly can. Is that a fair assumption? That we all want to do some due diligence and have some questions answered. And the biggest question is, what would the participation be that we need to ask of families and staff and high school students? And that's certainly something we can put together tomorrow, have out by the end of this week and have back for discussion. Because again, we're talking about 1 or 2 questions, and have that back for a discussion next Wednesday night. So I think that's certainly a very clear path forward. I guess the only other question I would say is, and maybe this isn't an answer tonight, maybe this is an answer that we walk away with next week, to say, again, going back to why are we doing the testing? Why are we, whatever the investment is, what's the desired outcome at the other end? If it's, once we have this in place, we're bringing students back full in person, that's a very different path than not, just maintaining hybrid. Or it's just good data to have, or, whatever the answer is, I think that's a key question that we need to answer. Like I said, I think that's more of a next week question once we have the information about responses about who would participate.
Can I just suggest, Brian, too? I from my perspective, I don't know that it's just about learning model. Part of this is about the fact that we've had classes and entire grades and programs that have had to go out, and I don't know necessarily that it's an entire learning model question. It's how can we help those groups stay in, because that's very difficult when you literally are getting a call at whatever time of the morning and are being told that that your student is not coming in that day and won't be in for the next however long.
Yeah, and this would cut down on that. It will not solve it all. Right. So it's still going to happen, right? Even with testing, unless we're testing all the time, more than once a week, someone's going to miss a test. They're going to be out. They're symptomatic, whatever. They come back. They didn't tell us they were symptomatic. So it's not, I think the other thing, and I don't think it's been mentioned here, and I don't remember who said it, if it was Tina or Kristen Jolivet who said it. It's just, we have to be really cautious about a false sense of security with this. That, is it important data? Absolutely. But it is not the panacea. So it's really dangerous to think that we put this into place and make any assumption that it's going to solve the problems. And I think Marissa, you and I have had this discussion. There's lots of different things along the way here that if we make an assumption that this is going to solve the problem, I guarantee it will not. And it will come back to bite us.
Yes.
So, yeah.
Absolutely true. Yeah. Pauline.
Brian, has legal, or is it just an accepted premise that you have to get consent in order to test?
For students,
Right.
there is no legal opinion necessary. We have to get consent for everything. Yeah, that is, so on all things, right? And certainly we have to, I mean, well, technically we get consent to, to participate in a survey. So if we're doing a medical test, yes, because this is, we're actually becoming, so I don't know if some superintendents have posted this on their Twitter, not real active on my Twitter. When you get approved your CLIA waiver to perform the Binax Now tests, you're deemed a laboratory and the superintendent is the laboratory director, right? So, I mean, this is the level of, right, I don't want that. I don't want that certificate. We'll get it, but, right? So I think it's the, yes, if we are doing medical testing and participating, we absolutely need that consent, yes.
Any other comments or questions from the committee? Otherwise, I mean, I think, I don't hear anybody saying a strong yes. I don't hear anybody saying a strong no. I'm hearing we want more data and more information, right? And then a chance to come back and discuss that. Yes, seeing lots of nodding heads. Brian, do you think you can run a survey so that we would have results by next Wednesday?
Yeah, that's what I was saying. Absolutely. I mean, it's going to be a 1 or 2 question survey. We'll, I'm just thinking about the rest of the night tonight and tomorrow, what that looks like. But by tomorrow night or by Friday afternoon, I think we can definitely get a survey out and ask families that by, call it noon on Wednesday. I mean, this is more a poll than a survey. I think when parents hear survey, they hunker down and thankfully want to give some thoughtful responses. This is a question or two, get it out there and quick response on a phone. So yes, we will get data to review Wednesday night. We're not going to have it to post obviously with the agenda tomorrow or Friday, but we'll definitely have data to review on Wednesday night next week.
Okay. That makes total sense. All right. So seeing nothing else, sorry, I'm just pulling my agenda back up. All right, seeing nothing else, we'll move on to the fiscal year 22 budget review. I'm assuming that, is that back to you or back to Kyle?
I'm going to safely say people are sick of hearing me talk, so let's listen to Kyle for a while.
With pleasure. So continuing our discussion from last week, provided all of you, the committee, with 3 documents. The first one I'd like to go over is the summary of proposed changes for the FY22 budget. This is actually, Brian, I don't know if you mind sharing the link in the chat so anybody on can access that.
I was just going to do that. So if you look in, am I muted? Nope. If you look in the chat, for those of you that are not on the committee and got this document, these were late breaking documents after the posted agenda, but there are 3 documents that are linked there in the chat now that you should be able to access via a web browser.
Perfect, thanks. So this document is I'd say, addendum to the document that we talked about last week, showing a progression. Looking at the columns, I think that's helpful. So we have the different items there that we talked about last week, the January 27th budget request, all that matches exactly what we were chatting about. Then an adjustments column for any adjustments based on new available information. And then the next 3 together show kind of our prioritization of each of these elements, whether it's a fixed cost and top priority, a lower priority item, or an item that could be covered by the ESSER II funding, that federal grant, $852,000 that we received. So I'll give a quick abbreviated walkthrough of the documents. The line items. Starting on the first page there, we have the salary changes, the steps in COLAs, cost of living adjustments for the 5 collective bargaining agreements. That is the same as last week. Those are contractual obligations. 3 of the collective bargaining units are still in negotiations, so we have an estimate there for those COLAs. We have a cost of living adjustment for our non-union staff members, so central office, admin. Then there's the projected column movement. That's for any teaching staff or instructional assistants who anticipate gaining additional credits or additional degrees, so moving over a column to a different rate. Last year, we only had 10 people reach out indicating that they anticipated movement. This year we had 35, so that's why you see a larger number in comparison to last year. The salary reserve, looking to maintain that at $140,000 level. That $52,000 is required to bring it up to that 0.5% of our total payroll. And then the FY21 staffing reductions. I think that better way to explain that is actually unfilled positions that we had both this year as well as we anticipate not being filled next year as well. There's a grade 2 at Salisbury Elementary School and a grade 6 at Pine Grove Elementary School. So the net, that yields about $167,000 worth of savings. That's both the salaries and the benefits. So a total of $847,000 increase associated with salaries. Jump to the next page. Benefit charges. We have our medical dental insurance. That's $104,000 is reflective of a 2% increase over last year, which we've heard from our representatives is pretty conservative. There may be a July premium holiday. We haven't had confirmation of that yet, so we can't assume that, but we are hopeful to receive notice either way in the coming weeks or maybe month. Liabilities and workers' comp insurance, workers' comp 2%, general liability 8 to 10% increase. Unemployment insurance, that's to stay, that increases to reflect the current market, the increased claims that we've been receiving. And then retirement, that's our Essex Regional Retirement System assessment for our the pensions on our non-teaching staff. That assessment increased 137 over last year. So total benefit changes, 272,743, and all of these listed as a high priority item, fixed cost. Programming changes, special education out of district tuitions, this 206,000 increase over last year. This is based on the detailed student roster that we're looking at right now. It's a high watermark, but we're certainly paying close attention to that. That 206 is net of 100,000 of ESSER 1 funding, the first round of ESSER funding that we received this past March. So that's built into that figure. General transportation, that's with our bus contractor NRT for our yellow bus services. The 46,500 is reflective of the contractual rate increase. We have a 5-year contract with them, I believe it is. School choice and charter tuitions, that's based on the current data that we've been receiving from DESE. Did want to highlight this charter school tuitions. In the adjustments column, we did reduce that down by 50,000 from our previous conversation because of the newly available information. General technology and athletics, kind of grouping those together by and large. We expect level services, some reallocation between line items, contractual services, supplies, things of that nature, where there may be a cost that was one time in nature. Don't have to account for that, but then there's increased supply costs. So we'd be movement between those two line items. Athletics, though, does have a $4,600 proposed increase over last year for the contractual increases in the coaching stipends. That's per the TRTA collective bargaining agreement. All those are stipulated right in there for the next fiscal year. So total programming changes, 213,522. Again, a $50,000 decrease from our previous conversation last week. Then the final portion of the fixed charges, custodial supplies and contracted services. We'll have some reallocations within those line items between schools. because there were some savings at Pine Grove due to the opening of the new school. One-time costs won't be recurring, so we'll reallocate those to the supply line items so that each elementary school has 25,000 for supplies going forward to next year for PPE, disinfecting solution, which isn't going anywhere. We're going to have to keep doing that for a while. And then utility and services, we're showing an $85,000 decrease there. That, again, reflective of largely the Pine Grove School, which was way more efficient than we anticipated, both from a electricity consumption perspective, as well as the heating systems, the heating fuel, the boilers, condensing boilers, I think they're called. We feel we can safely assume an $85,000 savings over last year. So looking at that bottom row there, you can see the $1,298,977. That was what we chatted about last week, the $50,000 savings. So our fixed charges that we're looking at right now is the $1,248,977, showing as a high priority item. I went through that very fast. Any questions on any of those line items or the updated information?
Questions from the committee? I know we've been through all this once, so twice for some of us.
Yeah.
But anyone have questions? All right.
I can jump into this. You got cut off there at the end. You
can keep going.
I'll jump.
I just said go ahead on. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Strategic new spending. So here, these were the 5 items at the end from last week. We actually broke them out into a little bit more detail. The first one being full day K year 2 of the 3-year phase-in plan. Full day K, we have a revolving fund where we collect tuitions of about $225,000 annually prior to the rollout of this plan. So spreading that over 3 years, it would be a cost of $75,000 per year. The current year, that was included. So we reduced the tuitions down from $3,000 to $2,000. If the year 2 is included in the FY22 budget, that would reduce tuitions down to $1,000 per year. Then the next item, the special education specialized programming. This $100,000 is reflective of teaching a specialist cost, both benefits, salaries, as well as some supplies, to not only meet the needs of students we currently have, but it could also be viewed as a cost-saving measure, a future cost-saving measure, because if we aren't able to meet the needs of these students, there's the risk that they could go to an out-of-district placement, which would cost even more than this $100,000. So twofold, wanting to meet those needs as well as thinking long-term. So David explained that in greater detail last week. The next one, curriculum and instruction. This is for the Math in Focus program that we had a 6-year license on that program. Came to the end of it. We're now needing an upgrade. We're recommending that for the kindergarten through 6th grade, I believe it is. Yep, K through 6, implementing the new updates to that program. That comes at an added cost of $42,000 over last year. There were some savings in curriculum it's actually a cost of $85,000, but we were able to net that out against some savings. This is a one-time cost, so we're recommending that be budgeted against the ESSER II funding, the $850,000 federal pool there. And the PC network technician, this is to have an additional full-time role so that we have 4 full-time technicians, 1 at each campus, to support all of the devices that we're using. Students are using with the newly implemented one-to-one Chromebook program, where we have around 1,000 additional devices. Certainly the help desk tickets, it's our current staffing level of these technicians is not sustainable based on our needs. So we're that $73,000 we're showing as a high priority item. Next is the technology integration specialist. This would be a new role for, I guess if you look at it in comparison to the PC technician, the technician is supporting the devices. The technology integration specialist is making sure that we use these devices to the greatest of their capabilities, to have the greatest impact on student learning. That 83,107 is at an M6 level plus benefits, and we anticipate that this role would work with staff members to, again, better integrate the technology in the classroom. Lastly is the extended learning opportunities. We have $300,000 listed there. This has 3 different components. There's extended learning opportunities for the K-8 level, as well as high school interventions, each of those at $100,000 apiece, which are to implement a summer extended learning program, looking at the different core content areas to address student learning loss. It wouldn't, Kim used the phrase last week that was, I liked a lot, where it's not starting over, it's to, especially at the high school level, it's a credit recovery program. So this would be in 3 small instructional groups, 3 to 4 weeks. We're using the term modules, and it would be staffed by Triton teachers. That cost that you're seeing there at $100,000 each would be for the instructional costs plus some supplies. And then also is the health and wellness, or actually let me look at those 2 first. So we're proposing where those are anticipated to be one-time costs. It would be a good candidate to be budgeted against the ESSER II funding. And then now jumping to the health and wellness coordinator, which is the last component of the extended learning opportunities. That's a proposed budget addition of $100,000. We keep talking about the social emotional needs of our students. This role would be to hire a coordinator who would review our existing resources, our existing curriculum, and work with staff and administration to develop a wellness program for students. Couple different options we've talked about here, because you'll see it's split in that second section of 3 columns. 50,000 is included in ESSER II funding, because trying to think creatively about this, we could, while we would like to hire a full-time role at that 100,000 plus benefit figure, another option is to go with a outside contractor where they would bill us, they would invoice us, they wouldn't be a full-time staff, and it'd allow us to kind of test the waters a little bit.
And let me just jump in to say on that. I mean, so that's a stopgap that we haven't fully vetted to know how well that would work or not work. But we were thinking, okay, it was pretty clear that given the discussion with our town officials and where the budget was landing, that 100,000 couldn't be assumed at this point. So we thought, okay, let's put 50,000 assumption into the ESSER II. And we're not sure, like we said, not sure the viability. There's certainly a value to begin the planning of all those services, those wraparound services that we're going to need to provide on the, just the basic mental health of our students returning. I'm talking with superintendents today about, I don't think we really understand when students, so assuming we're back full in person in September, it will have been 1.5 years since we had full schools. And that has a massive impact on everyone involved. So there's a lot of planning that we have to do to make sure that we're ready for that. If we can bring that back full in person before then, obviously that's different. But whenever that happens, it's a big shift. So I think, we talked about targeting, putting up a pot of 50,000 again, that the ESSER II funds were just kind of earmarking in chunks right now. And so lots to plan through that, but it's a placeholder at this point because we know there's lots of work to do. we know there's lots of work to do. Sorry to cut you off, Kyle.
I think he was, are you done, Kyle? Are you ready for?
Great, great spot for questions. Yeah.
Questions from the committee? Wow, you all are a silent lot tonight.
See, Paul Lee has his hand raised.
Oh, go ahead, Paul.
So Brian, I was only able to make part of the DCC meeting, but I think what I heard you just say was at the latter part of the meeting, some of the town officials had pushed back against the full-time health and wellness coordinator.
No, not that position specifically. So when we get to the assessment, right, we always have to talk about what our expenditures are, then what our revenues are, and then what that means for our towns. When we looked at the assessment scenario, the shift in enrollment always plays a big factor in determining our assessments. And this year, the largest outflow of students was from Rowley, which pushed Salisbury's share of our assessment over 40%, 40.08%. So at the higher end, they were over $1 million to include all those costs, $1 million increase on their assessment. So it wasn't that there was any specific position that any of them pushed back on. I mean, as a general rule, I think by and large, they've been supportive of the work we do, but it was more the feasibility of being able to fund the assessment.
We can come, I think we can come and talk a little bit more. It makes more sense to talk about kind of the town's reactions after we get through the assessment portion, which I assume is where Kyle's headed next. Since I'm seeing.
Yes, that was actually exactly where I was going to go next.
Thanks, Kyle.
Perfect. Okay, so actually right before I jump into that assessment sheet, I just want to bring your eyes to the last line there, total operating increases. So that first column there, the 1,972,084, that was that high water mark we were discussing last week. The next adjustments, the 50,000. So that's built in. That's an assumption that we feel comfortable with moving forward. So if you take that piece there and then going over to the columns, 292,000 from the ESSER funding, 133,000 we're detailing as lower, still necessary, but lower priority items. And then fixed cost and top priority items is the 1,496,977. So those totals will flow over to our assessment sheet, which was the, I think, second document that I had sent to you. So this sheet here details two different scenarios. And the first is the fixed cost plus the highest priority items. So you can see there the preliminary increase of 1,496,977, or a 3.37% over last year. And then this is getting this is a preliminary allocation to the communities based on the October 1st, 2020 enrollment figures. I think Brian mentioned it, or it's at least detailed in this, the little box right above that, where MASS right now is chatting about which enrollment figures to use because of those huge shifts.
Yeah. So can I just expand on that a little bit? I know our North Shore Roundtable superintendents are meeting with our legislators, and I know one of the superintendents was meeting with Senator Tarr today. I don't think there's a real clear understanding at the state level of the impact of, now the estimate is about 37,000 student drop across the state in foundation enrollment. So for us, the impact for cities and towns where they're not getting new Chapter 70A through the Student Opportunity Act, I think the state looks at that and says, okay, we understand that impact. What they don't understand is that for a region, the critical component of our calculation is, first, everyone pays their minimum local, which is inclusive of the foundation enrollment. And then the amount above their minimum, they pay on a foundation enrollment percentage. So for us, we don't have a smoothing, right? We don't have a 3-year, 5-year average. So that shift, we shifted almost a full percentage point. You can see it's 0.74%. Salisbury went up almost 3/4% of the total share, which means they get their regular 40% of the increase plus, or 38% of it, plus they're getting an added share because their total percentage increased. So it becomes a game of proportions and ratios. So MASS started this, and I believe it's getting some traction. We all assume, right? There's like, we've had this discussion each week. There are certainly families who chose private schools and will keep their students in private schools. The majority of the folks I've spoken with who are homeschooling or private schools, it's been a stopgap for the current year to get students either full in person in a private school, or if a student's going to be home, parents felt like it was easier to just homeschool. We expect those students return to us in September. That's the basis of this budget. So that will have a huge swing next October when we take the count in the fall for the following year, which would mean you can see here with Rowley or Salisbury getting a $900,000 increase. Rowley's, we always joke, it's not a joke, but we always joke about someone's getting the easy year. Rowley gets the easy year this year with a $211,000 increase. So if that pans out and all those students do return, the following year that recorrects in the other direction, and Salisbury and Newbury have a good year, and Rowley gets whacked the following year. So the hope is that it doesn't, I see Joe's with us tonight, so it doesn't, most of the selectmen understand that there's value in consistency, right? No one wants to save money if they know they're going to get whacked the following year. So there's a value in that consistency. So MASS, so Mass Association of School Superintendents, has been advocating, it seems to be getting some traction, to not use this past October, which we know is a pandemic deflated number, and instead either use 1 year ago, or so October of 19 or June of 20. So the thinking there is statutory language that requires an October 1 use. So if it's easier statutorily to use a full year prior, great. If not, the final end of year count from June of 2020 would also be a far more accurate figure. So just putting that out there, because there's still a lot of assumptions that we're making here, right? Every year we make assumptions through the final budget. This year we're making a lot more assumptions up at the top. We have there, we're still calling for a decrease of 117,000 in other local revenues and regional transportation, Chapter 70, and interest income. So there are still areas where we know on the expenditure side, or we don't know, we think we might be able to produce some savings, which changes these numbers. But at this point, it's setting the high water mark, as we always do with the tentative budget. But unlike other years, that percentage could end up changing significantly come the final budget, or by the time the final budget is produced at the state level, and we would have some scrambling to do. So putting that out there as an added wrinkle this year.
You're making my life easy. You explained all that really well.
Give you a chance to take a break.
The one extra thing I just want to add, so Brian mentioned the 117,000 decrease in local receipts. So when you look at these two charts, the bottom two charts detailing the two different scenarios there, you can see the preliminary for the fixed costs and highest priority items, the 1,496,977. That's different than in the chart where it details the allocations to the communities of 1,614,418. That difference is the 117,000 that he just described, where the regional transportation, Chapter 70, and interest income decrease. And then lastly, just the last chart there is the 1.6 million for all the requests, net of the ESSER2 offsets, the 292,000 that we detailed there in the other document.
Do we want to do questions now, since I see
Yeah.
Mr. Goldner? hand up? Okay, hello Goldner.
Okay, so I think my question is, hearing what you're saying about using older numbers, if we were able to use older numbers and Salisbury was more around 39.5% compared to a little over 40%, I'm looking at that, that's a swing of about $200,000 in their assessment. Is that, I mean, that to me seems extremely significant, but there's also no chance we would really know that before we have to vote a final budget, is there? Because that's only a month away.
Yeah, so the only hope is a joint resolution, and there is some, I think I mentioned that last week, there's certainly more talk of joint resolution earlier than I've ever heard it. So a joint resolution would be all parts of the government will say, coming together to say, okay, we're going to agree Chapter 70 in general unrestricted UGA aid to the cities and towns, because they all know that cities and towns need that money to balance a budget, likely well before they finalize their budget on June 29th. So it could happen because foundation enrollment is part of the Chapter 70 figure. If we got an early joint resolution that would confirm it prior to the budget being final on June 30th. Yeah, I'll stop there.
So it would be an informal agreement, essentially. The budget wouldn't be done, right? But both the House and the Senate would be saying, this is the way we're going to figure it when it comes to our turns.
So they signal an early commitment. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah.
And they haven't historically gone back on that commitment.
No, and they did one last fall, so
Yep, they did it pretty early too.
we have recent history, yes.
Yeah, so the yield there would be likely that Newbury and Salisbury would go down and Rowley would go up. Again, not drastically, but like you said, Paul, could be, upper ones to $200,000. And then that gets shared off with likely a smaller dip in Newbury and added to Rowley, and it levels them off.
So coming back to last Thursday to kind of finish up this conversation, we had, I don't even know how many people, good number of people at the DCC meeting this time around. I think at one point I saw almost all of the Salisbury Board of Selectmen there, which is unusual. So I'll let Brian start it off because what Salisbury said was Brian's going to talk to Neil.
Yeah. Neil could make it. Yeah. So when we were looking at last week, I forget the low 1.298, right? So level services, which would now be the 1.248, was in the vicinity of $800,000, low eights. And in his response, as you said, the selectman said, we'll leave that to Neil. I wouldn't say he was exuberant about the figure. It's certainly not an easy number, but in his words, he understands the reality that Salisbury is becoming a larger portion of the district each year, with either a slightly increasing or the slowest decrease in overall population. So his initial take was something down towards that $800,000 figure is going to be something that's at least in contention. The in the nines, $1 million, over $1 million, in his words, that's just not something that the budget is going to be able to support. So.
All right. And going down the list, so Newbury said that they're just starting their budget process. Alicia seemed open to the number. She was kind of the spokesperson for the towns. Didn't seem like there was anything shocking there. I understand that the finance committee met last night and there was no change in that. They had the numbers that we used last Thursday for the discussion with the towns, and that there was, no one was shocked or aghast, or, I feel like reactions go one or two ways, right? It's either, yep, we'll kind of deal with it, don't like it, but we'll deal with it, or it's, oh my gosh, this is totally out of where we need to be. And I would say it was the former. And I don't know if they sent Joe as an emissary tonight, but Rowley said that that at that point they knew they were also starting their budget process. They knew they were going to be down in hotels and meals and excise, but hadn't had kind of their formal discussions yet. They were going to talk on this past Monday and send a letter. We have, unless Brian has received it, I have not received any letter, right? Okay. So I don't want to put Joe on the spot here. I don't know if he was specifically sent or if no. Okay. All right. We'll let you go, Joe, and we will wait for the letter then. How does that sound?
That was beautifully subtle. I just want to say. No.
No. I didn't know. I have to ask some of these times. So we'll be on the lookout for that letter. I know in the past it's typically like been scanned and sent, I believe, to both Brian and me, and then we get a paper copy later, I believe, and we haven't gotten anything around that yet. So we'll keep an eye out for that, and when we get it, we'll send it on to the committee. So that's where we're at following the DCC meeting, and we scheduled another meeting for the DCC, which is, I can tell you, I want to say it's the 24th, but that doesn't sound right. It is the 25th at 6:30. Yeah. Yeah, the 25th. So that'll be the next one. So that allows us to go in after the tentative before we vote a final. And at the end of this conversation, we're going to talk about where the public hearing should fall. So that'll also fall somewhere in there. Are we going on through grants, Kyle, or was that just an FYI document?
Yeah, that was more of an FYI document where our conversations have been touching upon all the various COVID relief fundings that we've received since the start of the pandemic to date. Thought that this would be helpful context to show each of those grants, so the 5 different funding sources, what we've either committed to them to using those awards towards to date, or at the bottom of that sheet there, it shows proposed expenditures. We haven't fully committed yet, but showing our intended use of those funds. And then actually towards the top of the document, about a third of the way down, it shows the allowable use period. That's very important in our planning. Like Brian was highlighting earlier, navigating into next year, there's a lot of unknowns. So if wanting to pay attention to when we can use these funds, that ESSER2 funding is actually allowable till FY23. There's a slight typo there, but it can be used in FY22 and FY23, whereas that we found out last week, I think a couple hours before the meeting, that COVID prevention fund, pot of $100,000 extra we received, that can only be used in this current fiscal year. So it shows what we're using each grant for, as well as the timeline that we intend on using it. So I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, I was just a note. I mean, we were talking about this, and I think he had a good idea. We talk a lot about all these grants, even the current year and into next year. And I think it was a good point on his part to put this on a single sheet so that no one can say, "Aren't you getting other funds or whatever?" You have full access to everything that we have received and will receive and where we're currently allocating those funds. So thank you, Kyle.
I agree. I think that's very helpful, Kyle. Thank you. All right. So I will open it back up to the committee at this point, because at our next meeting on the 10th, we have to vote a tentative budget. That's going to be, they call it the high water mark budget. So essentially it's not legal, but as a courtesy and out of, I guess, sense of tradition, the number does not go up from there. We've held off on any increase after that. So it gives the towns, as they're beginning their budget process and starting working through, a number that they know our budget will not be higher than. This year, obviously, assessments are kind of I wouldn't say they're an open question, right? We have something to plan with, but we also know that there's a potential that there's a movement there to adjust those. So that might slide around a little bit as time goes on. So that's something that we'll have to keep an eye on, but obviously we can set this kind of high water mark. So what Kyle and Brian need tonight are, well, A, questions, if we have questions on the items that are on here, and then B, some guidance on what the committee would like to see in that high watermark budget. And again, you know, we can adjust anywhere within there we want. So we can say, you know, $100,000 over here is going to go in this other bucket to be spent elsewhere as time goes on. There's usually a lot of refining of numbers as the budget process goes on, both on the revenue side and on the expenditure side. So we'll see those coming through as we get more final numbers on things like healthcare, for instance. But you know, we need to give some guidance tonight on kind of what we want to see in the document that that will get voted on the 10th. So that said, I will open it to the committee for input or questions, if you have questions. Caitlin.
I have a question. I don't know if it belongs in this discussion or where it goes, but I know there's $100,000 for extended learning opportunities that are going to occur in the summer modules. Is there a discussion about what happens in the perfect world where we bring 100% of our students back, or just a small population remote, where there's going to be a higher need for interventions or 504 or IEPs as that process rolls through? Are we anticipating like a higher number?
I was gonna say, so you're talking into next school year.
Like if looking into from here to September, as students start coming back into the classroom and teachers start having eyes on fully, and it's not just a gap issue, like, yes, we were kind of in flux this year, but it turns out that they need more support. Is there a bucket somewhere for that?
Go
ahead.
I would say kind of twofold, or two different elements within the out of district placements figure. That $200,000, that was the high watermark, actually $300,000 increase net of the ESSER funding. That has built into it some assumptions that there are certain students who will need to shift because of everything pandemic related learning loss and other factors, need to shift to an out of district placement. But other than that, I would say, and maybe David can jump in on this too, is that on the grant sheet, the ESSER round 2 at the very bottom, the $410,220 that we're showing as the uncommitted balance of that total $852,000 grant award, that would ultimately be utilized for things of that nature as well. Or if that's fully utilized, we would have to find savings in other areas. So I would say in the budget document as presented, that out of district tuitions figure is probably the one spot where we do have some of that built in.
Okay.
Yeah, so I would agree. And just as we would in any year, we have to take it situation by situation. If we come across students that are struggling, we need to deal with it. And we do have funds in the regular budget. The one issue that I can see coming up is that students may be struggling, but may not have a disability. So then that's going to be sort of, how do we approach that from our regular ed perspective? Because we're getting an influx of it, you know, which I understand parents are concerned. So we're getting a request for more evaluations, but the students are not necessarily eligible as having a disability. They're just having a hard time because of the pandemic. So besides we have funding built into our contracted services and other mechanisms at this point. I mean, again, I always want to reiterate that we're developing a budget like 17 months early. We're going from now until next July. So, this is probably, I don't like the word unprecedented, but it really is a year that we're just going to have to use the resources we have, and we'll have to problem solve, as we always have, in the future.
I was gonna say, Kim, you unmuted. Were you gonna talk about general interventions at all?
Yeah, I was just going to say, the teachers are absolutely anticipating that next year for that, even just that, the first couple of months, that there is going to be a lot of needs that need to be addressed. And then, kind of wrapping in what David's talking about, teasing out those kids who potentially have a disability, as opposed to some of those kids who just need more time or really missed out on that in-person learning experience. Because what we put into place and what we use with that COVID relief fund, that's available for 1 year only. So in order for us to strengthen our structure, we need to create a structure with the resources that we have now so that we can maintain that quality Tier 1 instruction. And so I think kind of using that as a lens to plan ahead. One of the things that I noticed is the class sizes are still small for next year at the elementary level. So that's going to be really helpful. We'll still use, obviously, our reading and math specialists to help plan some of those interventions and identify more priority standards, as opposed to trying to tackle the whole entire curriculum. So again, it's a long-term plan as far as getting these kids back on track where they need to be. And with the resources that we have in play currently, it will be a struggle, but financially, that just having something 1 year is not going to fix a problem that's really long-term, that we need to generate some internal structures that are available for a longer and extended period of time.
Does that answer your question, Caitlin?
It does. Thank you.
All right. Just checking. Linda.
Narissa, are you asking us from this list that has been put together, the fixed costs and top priorities, if we agree with what's being put in there?
So part of it could be that. Part of it could be that Kyle's given you two different numbers on the assessment sheet, and we can add or remove from those as we want, and he could recalculate them for a tentative budget.
Well, we have to go with a high water mark so I think the high water mark would be all the requests in the ESSER 2 offsets. I think that should probably be what the high water mark is.
The bottom one.
Yeah.
Is what you're looking at. That is fair. Is there anything you think should be, changed priority, or are you?
Well, I mean, this is a year like no other. I mean, we have no idea going into September what's going to happen. I mean, if we go full time for the students, how much intervention our students are going to need.
Right.
So I personally think the high water mark should be the bottom number.
Okay.
I mean, we can always come down from that. At least we know that that is what the high water mark is.
Yeah. No, that's fair. Thank you. Paul Goldner.
I think this is very much related to what Caitlin was saying, but then try and swing it back to that budget request. I guess we have those students who might need the outplacement because of additional impact from this year. And then in the general ed classroom, I sort of see that in a lot of ways, everybody's going to be teaching about a half year earlier from what they were. But the lean on the school psychologists and the adjustment counselors, I feel like is going to be much, much harder especially in the beginning, because everybody has new mental health issues and needs that. So I guess I'm looking at the budget request and I'm seeing that that health and wellness position to me is a higher priority, and I would rather not see that move towards a contracted out position, because even though that's not dealing with, we're providing those services now, it's finding those pieces and putting them together in some ways and moving us forward. And we're not going to just be leaning on those mental health people because of this year. It's not just going to be the first few months next year, it's going to be years into the future.
Thanks, Paul. Linda, are you back, or did you not remove your hand?
No, my hand was not put down.
Oh, sorry. I can put your. Oh,
Thank you.
everybody already got it.
On it.
Sorry about that.
Sorry, I missed you.
All right, I just wanted to say, I agree with Linda. I think that we should be looking at the high water mark as being the second, the ESER 2 offsets to include those. I also think that the health and wellness should be a top priority. I mean, I feel like we're going to have a lot of students coming back that are going to need some real support, and I think that to make that, it just doesn't make sense to me that it's a low priority. I think it should be a high priority. So I agree with what Paul said, Paul Goldner. I think that that's an important thing to make in our top priority category.
Thanks, Maureen. Other comments or questions? Anybody? Sorry, scrolling. Seeing, oh, Paulise.
I just want to ditto the health and wellness coordinator. I've been pushing for that for a series of years on the budget.
Sorry, can you say that again, Paul?
I've been pushing for the last several budget years to implement the health and wellness coordinator.
Yes. Yes, you have. All right. Any other questions or comments from the committee? So, I mean, I guess I said this last time too, is that I am a little disappointed that there wasn't more health and wellness in here. That said, given where, you know, kind of Brian, Kim, and Kyle and Dave have come from on this, I don't think it's bad to have it as a contracted position in the beginning, because I'm not sure that's not going to need to morph in the long run. And I know sometimes it's been difficult because when we've made a hire, you're making a hire for a long term, and it's not necessarily something that's flexible, that allows you to have, you know, to have kind of that flex position to fill where the needs are. And since we don't know where the needs are yet, I'm not sure that making a hire right now is the best thing to do. I don't know. That's just my kind of take on that, is I would rather be flexible and be able to adapt, at least for the first 6 months or so of next year, rather than making a hire and having it be, you know, having there be a greater need elsewhere, in sort of a different position with a different set of qualifications. So all that said, I think I too would go for the higher of the numbers, with the, you know, nod to the fact that we're aware of where the towns are. You know, I was having this conversation earlier today, and I think it's never good. We don't want to be in a position, right, where that that backlash is happening, because that never puts us in a place to sit down and kind of work through things as we're having these conversations as a committee or having our conversations with the towns. So I think we need to keep those conversations going. I want to do, you know, leave options open and leave us, you know, kind of maximum flexibility going into the tentative budget, with a number that's not, I mean, we're not talking about a 10% hike here, right? Which might be what we need for next year. But it's definitely not what's being proposed because we're operating kind of within the reality that we have here. And I just want to, make sure that we're passing on that message that kind of we heard what the town said. We're continuing to work through this and understand that, that we're in a pandemic situation here and we're going to need to continue to work on this as the months go on. So does anyone have concerns with with going with the higher number that's listed there on the bottom of the assessment sheet? I am seeing none. Go ahead, Brian.
So I didn't hear anyone talk about the technology integration specialist. And not to say that it wasn't important, but clearly health and wellness, right? Mental health, it is the theme. It is going to be the theme for the foreseeable future. The figure of 1.630 million, that assumes 50,000 in the general fund and 50,000 coming out of ESSER 2 funds to fully fund that health and wellness coordinator. Am I lying, Kyle? Right? Isn't that correct? Nod, yes.
That's correct. Yep.
Okay. So, I guess my question is, talk about the importance of that, right? If we're relying on one-time funds, that becomes a challenge into the future versus assuming it in the budget in the general fund allows us to continue, even if it is a contract, right? It could end up being that 100,000 is actually contracting for services and coordination, and it's coordination answer. Like we haven't fully vetted what the position is or what the resource would be. But if we fund it with the 1.63, that's leaving 50 in ESSER 2, and that has to be made up the following year when we know this is going to be, right? We know this is going to be a long-term need. So I guess my question is, the 87,103 for the technology integration specialist, I can't talk tonight. That position, if we pulled that out and put the extra 50 in, we're in the same ballpark, and it's fully funding the health and wellness coordinator out of the general fund in the budget and not the technology, or maybe it's both, right? So it's, I don't have a necessarily a suggestion in regards to that. Just, I guess the bigger question is the number 1.63 is assuming 50 still coming out of ESSER, which is cliff funding for half of that position.
So can I ask for a clarifying question on that before we move on? If you're talking about pulling 50K out of the ESSER 2 funds for that position, whatever that looks like, would you then be thinking about moving some of those ESSER 2 funds to use them for some other social emotional related services or position, or are you just leaving those open?
I mean, I think, so ESSER 2 is not yet fully committed, right, on that sheet that Kyle put forward. It's not fully committed. They're kind of in large chunks. Certainly, one of the big impacts, academic and mental health, are the two kind of hanging chads, if you will, as we move forward through the balance of the spring and into next year. So yes, I think that would be, whether we call it 50, 200, or 400,000, absolutely, that would be a viable and very important use of those funds. We should also note, so the 100,000 that we just learned about last week was 100,203 or 302, whatever it is.
025.
025, the extra $25. That was added on. We're getting that allocation, payment in February, payment in March of 50,000. That's also, that would be a little more restricted, but that would be a viable use for those funds. So yes, there are certainly, by not using ESSER 2 funds, there will be many other potential uses for it, and mental health will be chief among them.
Thank you. Comments, questions, directions from the rest of the committee? Maureen?
I should have probably said it before, but, you know, I do view the technology integration specialists as a priority. I mean, to quote Kyle, when he was describing the difference of the two positions, the network technician supports the devices themselves, but the technology integration specialist gives the greatest impact on student learning. So, I mean, that statement right there just shows the importance of that position. But it's tough when you have to weigh, okay, well, we want to make the greatest, we want to have a person that's able to help with the greatest impact on student learning, but at the same time, if we're struggling with their health and wellness, like, you know, I have to put health and wellness higher. But I still see a tremendous value in that particular position. So.
Thank you for that.
Paul Mayette?
I'd add on to what Maureen was saying, in that position also would seem to me to be making the most of the investment we've made in this one-to-one initiative. That dramatically opens up what might be done in the classroom, but with that dramatic opening comes a flood of possibilities, and having someone that might be able to help parse those for teachers, I think would be quite valuable.
Other comments or questions from the committee? So would a viable solution, trying to find one here, be pulling on that bottom line number, pulling just for now, again, knowing that this is not the, you know, we're not even into the tentative budget yet, pulling 50,000 out of the ESSER funds, the ESSER 2, to free that up, and adding that to the bottom number to make it 1.65 instead of we said 1.68. 50,000, right? Or was it
1.68.
Yep.
1.68. Okay, it's 50,000. Yeah. 1.68. Paul Lees, where are you?
I just have a question. Kyle, how do we connect the $42,000 for Math in Focus to ESSER 2 funding?
Because that's those subscriptions or those costs are typically a 6-year cost. It's one time. We don't have to pay an annual, or I should say it's an upfront payment. It's not an annual recurring cost.
Okay, but aren't there parameters that the ESSER 2 is geared towards?
Yep. So this particular one, it would be, if it's addressing student learning loss, that you can, and with ESSER 2, I will say it's a lot more gray in what you can use it for. So I feel that it would be, my position is we would be able to charge that to it. We could reasonably argue that it was associated with responding to the pandemic. Brian, you want to add to that?
I was going to say, and if Kyle can say it qualifies as a recovering auditor, then it definitely qualifies. So, I mean, part of the value of the COVID 1 and the COVID 2 is how unrestricted it is. It allows us to address the needs that are coming out of the pandemic, and doesn't even need a logical tie. The CVRF funding was far more targeted and earmarked. So it qualifies. And then the reason why we put that funding in there is because of the fact that it's one time, that we don't want to put anything into that fund that we know when that fund dries up, it becomes cliff funding, and then we have a hole that we have to backfill with the general fund.
And the other thing I'd like to add too is if we look at the alternatives, if we didn't invest in that, what that would mean on student learning, if we weren't in a pandemic, maybe we could invest in this other program rather than this one, but this would have the least impact on the least negative impact on student learning by continuing with this curriculum type Math in Focus. But yeah, it is pretty, when you look at the different grant fundings there, the ESSER 1 and ESSER 2 funding are the least restrictive. The shortest of memos will have to be written on that, on those.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, forgive me if I refer to you this way, Kyle, but Kyle is a line tower. He toes the line. So if this is not over the line in Kyle's book, then I'm pretty sure we're good to go.
And I will say too, there's compliance supplements as a, in my former life when I used to look at these things. So there's still, the federal government is still developing the compliance supplements on these grants that from a much more minute sense details what's allowable and unallowable. So we'll continue to look at those. And if for some reason we didn't feel comfortable with that, there's other costs in our budget right now that are there that would be allowable. So you could flip those, so to say, and you wouldn't encounter that funding cliff. So while I do appreciate the gray in some of these areas, we are focused on not breaking any laws too. But that, I mean, Paul, that's a great question.
So what's the committee's thought? Do we want to look at the 1.68 as the high, knowing that's a high and acknowledging that we have a ways to go here? And have Kyle and Brian prepare that? Yes. Seeing nods. Anyone have concerns with that approach?
I just don't want to send a negative message to the town financial people.
Yeah, no, I hear you. And I think we can, as usual with the emails out to the DCC, we can provide a little more color than we can sometimes provide, other places where it has to be strictly factual. So I think we can make sure that that's provided as those documents are sent out.
I guess I would say along the lines of what Paul is saying, the high water mark is the mark, right? It's not, I'll give an example, but right, it's not where if we don't have it in the budget, we can't include it later. So as if we do achieve savings, if we do achieve more revenues than we've anticipated, we could leave the 1.63 and then backfill it, pull that money out of ESSER 2 and still be at the 1.63 if we end up, we're talking about out of district placements. If things materialize over the coming weeks and we're comfortable taking 50, we can swap that out and haven't touched that 1.63. Knowing that, at this point, it's been a very clear statement from Salisbury, who is getting the lion's share, that is not doable or close to doable. I think increasing that in any way, knowing that we have the flexibility to manage what is inclusive in that assessment figure, I just think we want to be cautious with that.
Did you not just suggest the opposite a little while ago?
Did I suggest the opposite by going up?
Yeah.
I didn't suggest, I said you could do one of either, right? I was saying I was hearing it wasn't as much support for the technology integration specialist. Take out the 83 and add the 50. Okay. I would have saved $33,107.
Yes, you would have. You're right.
Just saying,
All right. I'm with you now. I hear that. Paul, please.
So just another thought, to try to reduce the budget request, the integration specialist for $83,107. Kyle, would that pass muster in your ESSER 2 funding?
Yeah, it could. It would just create it would be in essence a one-year commitment to that role rather than long-term, but it would qualify.
Because the only thing, I don't want to be the skunk at the picnic, but I do have to ask this question. Those extended learning opportunities for $200,000, did any of the town finance people question that after I left the DCC meeting? Like, did they say, is there any more skin to the bones of that program that's been put out there? The $200,000 for the extended learning?
Not
Because-
that I recall and not in my notes.
Okay, because when that was all explained to us, it just seemed kind of thin, the explanation. I mean, I understand that the goal and the purpose, but my question is, what is the program? Something to be developed, or it just seems sort of amorphous to me.
It is still amorphous. That is absolutely, it is now, now the process is developing what's, you know, kind of like Caitlin was asking about, what are the needs? Are they social emotional? Are they academic? And so as we go through the spring, the focus is on the summer. And, you know, Kim's, in her brain, it's these modules where students can have access remotely in short stints, participate in multiple modules at the high school level, multiple courses. But there's a lot of work to do with the building principals, with educators to determine what the needs are. And then we need to make sure we're designing it to meet the needs, not on what we think right now are the needs. We know, I mean, they're certainly developing, but we need to confirm the needs and then build the program around the students. But it's a lot of money and it would be a lot of intensive support.
I mean, I don't see anybody else having their hand raised, but I'd say I'm personally comfortable. I think every dollar of that is going to be needed, Paul. And, you know, I think there's a lot of good thoughts. I know other districts that are looking at doing programs that are similar to this and are also in this kind of amorphous stage or whatever you want to call it, where, you know, you need to figure out where those needs are and where we're at in the school year is not an easy time to be able to do that. You know, I think, I don't know what the time frame is, but a couple more months, right? And then you have the information to be able to tell where better, at least where students are at coming into those summer months when you could provide those supports.
And the value of coming out of the ESSER II funding is that it's not restricted to the budget, right? So we're not waiting until town meeting to have a budget finalized in July 1st for the new funding to be available. Maybe it turns out to be 79,000 and not 100,000 K through 8. It turns out to be 150 at the high school or vice versa. The grant allows us that flexibility with the intention of it being short term, right? Is it through September 23 that we can use ESSER II, Kyle? I think that.
Of fiscal 23.
Fiscal 20, so September 22, right?
Yeah.
So another year and a half to use those funds. You know, that could end up being a large portion of those funds as we continue to develop that programming over the summer and into next year. It doesn't have to be just restricted to the summer. So yeah, so the number is literally, you know, I think on Kyle's sheet that's helpful, where the CVRF, the technology grant and ESSER I, those are fully committed. You know, we haven't even identified the uses for the new COVID prevention fund of 100,000. In the ESSER II, we've got buckets that we've carved out, but not a single dollar of that is committed at this point. So it's if we spend it, we spend it. If we don't, great, it's available for the next batch of needs. But that planning is ramping up. Is that a safe word, Kim? Right, that is. You're muted.
We already have a meeting scheduled, I want to say next week.
There it is.
There questions? Comments? We want to stay at the lower of those two numbers. I was just pulling the DCC information from last week too. 994. Okay. I mean, so looking at the DCC information from last week, because of the ESSER II coming down or being used more rather, those numbers have come down already on the assessment sheet from what were provided to the towns previously.
The number, yeah. Oh,
yeah.
Go ahead, Brian.
I was gonna say the low water mark was lower, the high water mark was higher on last week's, right? So again, not to put this all on Neil, right? But Salisbury getting the lion's share of this, he was talking about that lower end being
Yeah.
where he feels like he could support that in the budget.
Yeah.
So at the low mark, we're still above that. So at the high mark, we're way above that, right? So you figure Salisbury is going to get 50% of any new. So if we added 50,000,
Right.
that's 40% of 50,000, 20,000, right? So, so their assessment's going to go to 973 ballpark figure.
No, I just wanted to, I was trying to put in context what you had said earlier about not wanting to come up anymore. So I don't know, we can, I'll, the will of the committee, I don't know if we want to have them prepare for a 1.63, a 1.68. Preferences. I mean, there's still a lot of time to move funds around inside those, and we're still going to have things shift out as well. Usually for the lower than toward the higher, right? I mean, I'm assuming Kyle and Brian are providing, high level, the highest possible numbers, right, on some of those estimates, and the lower end on revenues. As far as what we know right now, it's possible that those are going to go up over time rather than down. So.
Regional transportation is the perfect example of that, as well as health insurance on the appropriation side. Yeah.
Regional transportation, man. I'll boost it personally if I have to go door to door. I feel like that's what we've done in past years, and gosh darn it. If it has to happen again, it has to happen again. So, committee, what would you like? Because these guys need some direction. Do you want to do 1.63? Because that was the last thing that came out on paper. Linda?
I think we should go with the higher watermark. I mean, I would go with the 168.
The 168?
Yeah, I would put the 50,000 in there. It can always come down. At least you'll have the number there.
Yeah. Okay. Maureen? Hang on, let me lower Linda's hand.
I just was going to say, I agree with Linda. I think we should be going with the high watermark, and based on what I heard last week from DCC, we can make adjustments down. We can't make adjustments up. So we have a lot of need that's going to be coming up in the next school year. So.
Yep, it's fair. So am I hearing any disagreement on going with the 1.68? Any shaking heads? I see none. All right. So can we go with the 1.68 then, Kyle and Brian, as you're preparing the tentative for next week?
Absolutely.
Okay. Thank you. Anything else on that other than determining a hearing date, which is the next thing on my list?
I don't think so. Kyle, that gives you all do the grand wizardry and produce a document. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay. There it is.
All right. So my other question for the committee is that typically what we've done with the public hearing is we hold it the week after February vacation. That would be the 24th. We need 2 weeks, right? Am I thinking that, Brian? 2 weeks of advertising time?
I think we're technically supposed to do 2 weeks. I don't know if anyone looks at the public notices, but technically we're supposed to put it in the paper twice.
Yeah. Okay. So we technically two weeks of public notices prior to that. We also have a meeting on March 3rd. And as Brian and I were talking through this, we were talking about, do we keep that date on the 24th, which could potentially give us short meetings on both the 24th and the 3rd, or do we try to combine them, skip the 24th and put the hearing first on the 3rd, and then meet to discuss immediately after that? So literally as soon as the hearing is adjourned, the school committee discussion we would begin that, essentially look at like starting a new meeting that followed immediately on the close of the hearing. Part of the reason we talked about this is because we're in, obviously a more condensed budget year. There's not a lot of movement in this budget the way that we've seen in past years where we were looking at, you know, restoring past years and things like that. You know, a lot of these are things that we have to do or are very high priority items. We're not seeing that much bigger list of high priority, medium priority, low priority. So, you know, I mean, there could be something that can't come up in a public hearing that is totally outside of what we've discussed, but my guess would be that it would be along the lines of the discussions that we've had tonight is how do you kind of use that funding that's there in the best way possible, and that if people came and spoke at the public hearing, that they'd be advocating in one of those directions. I don't know that to be true, but usually kind of when the document is big, there tends to be a lot of people weighing in different directions. And when the document is relatively small and the list of choices is relatively small, because we know it's going to be a tight year. And in this case, we're, you know, still figuring out what things like the interventions could look like. There tends to be less discussion. So it could be a longer night on the 3rd. It will likely, if there is something new that comes up at the hearing, it will not leave committee members with a lot of time to think about that or research that in between. So that would be a downside. But on the flip side of that, we could be having 2 very short meetings with just a week in between. So I'm looking for your input on that. Do we want to keep the 24th, in which case we'll advertise for the public hearing right away, hold that the 24th, and then hold the committee discussion on the 3rd? Or do we want to push the hearing out to the 3rd, hold that first, and then immediately afterwards hold the committee discussion? I know, so many options here. And this is why I didn't want to make this decision. Sometimes there are decisions that are easy to make that I'm like, yep, I know this is what the committee will want to do. This one, it was kind of Brian and I sat there, and there are plus and minuses to both of these. And, you know, I wanted to leave it more up to you. Paul Goldner.
I think I'm fine eliminating the 24th and having the public hearing back up to the school committee meeting.
Okay. Maureen? You're gonna say the opposite, aren't you?
I was gonna say the opposite.
I knew it.
Sorry, Paul. I like to have time to think about things that people say during the public hearings. I mean, I have no idea what this public hearing will be like this year. I mean, I feel like in the years past, they've kind of all been similar, but we're dealing with a very different situation this year. So I don't know. I personally would like to have the meeting, the first meeting on the 24th for the public hearing, and then come back again on March 3rd.
Okay, thank you. Paul Lees.
I'm with Maureen.
You're with Maureen? Okay, thank you. Linda?
I'm with Maureen too.
Maureen, all right.
Well, I need more time to think about it as well.
Okay, yeah, that's totally fair. Anyone else want to weigh in? Anyone have strong preferences? All right, we'll stick with the 24th then. So Brian, can we get that posted? Is that an easy, because that's going to be in short order.
Yeah, so Maureen's getting it drafted, but we can't actually post it until the link is live. So it will go in the paper. We'll have it ready so it goes in next Thursday, the 11th. It runs on Thursday, so it'll run Thursday the 11th and Thursday the 18th.
Okay.
And we'll have a link to the website with the tentative budget, because it's the tentative budget you're having the hearing on.
Right.
So
right, yeah.
we will have that in and ready to go for the 24th.
Okay, that sounds perfect. All right, so we'll plan on meeting the 24th for the next meeting will be the 10th, which is our regular business meeting, and we'll have a vote on the tentative budget, including the high water mark that we talked about tonight. We'll have the hearing on the 24th, and that'll be the only thing that night. We will have it's called the budget deliberation in my notes, budget deliberation meeting on the 3rd of March. And then, oh, sorry, I missed in there. We'll have the DCC on the 25th of February. So it'll be public hearing on the 24th, DCC on the 25th, budget deliberation on the 3rd, and then the final budget vote will be at the March business meeting, which is on March 10th. Okay, and I know almost all of those dates I've sent out to you previously. So if you go back to your last email, the only one that would be missing from there is the DCC meeting on the 25th, since that was just decided last Thursday. All right.
And
Anything
those
else
are all on the Google Calendar on the website too. The school committee calendar.
Is the DCC one there, Brian? Because I had just looked earlier and didn't see it.
It is now.
Okay. Like
It's
magic.
not multitasking.
Well, thank you for that. Okay, anything else that you need from us, Brian or Kyle, on budget matters?
No.
No, that was all helpful. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And that was the last item on the agenda. So I just need a motion to adjourn, and then business meeting will be next week.
I'll make a motion.
All right, I have Maureen making the motion. Linda, you want to second it?
Yes.
Since you've still got your mic on. All right, thank you. Any discussion on that? All right, I need a roll call vote, please. Erin,
Yes.
Paul Goldner,
Yes.
Maureen,
Yes.
Caitlin,
Yes.
Paul Lees,
Yes.
Linda,
Yes.
Paul Mayette.
Yes.
Thank you. And I'm a yes as well. So I appreciate your time. We'll be here next week for our business meeting, and that agenda will be coming out in a few short days. Thank you all, and have a good night.
Thanks, everyone.
Brian?